All right. Good afternoon. I'd like to call our workshop to order and like to declare that we have a quorum of 6 trustees present. Item C, public comments. Are there any comments related to agenda items for this meeting? There are not. We will move to D1, consideration and discussion related to TASB Policy Update 116. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Nugent. Policy Update 116. This evening will be first reading. Ms. Perry will give us an overview. Field any particular questions you may have on this item. We have included this in transmittal several weeks in a row. No action tonight. Again, first reading. And then what we would plan, as we do with any policy updates, we would look for approval upon second reading at the regular meeting in April. So with that, Ms. Perry is going to give us an overview of Update 116.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Martindale. Good evening, members of the board. At your place, you will find some familiar information related to TASB Policy Update 116, including the comparison packet with the proposed changes to the 4 local policy changes that are recommended as part of Update 116, as well as the explanatory notes that also incorporate those legal policies. As a reminder, the board does not adopt the legal policies. Those are law. However, the local policies are adopted, and we, as Mr. Martindale said, would be seeking your approval at the next regularly scheduled meeting in April. The 4 policies incorporated into the local proposals include CQB Local, regarding cybersecurity training. There are just a few adjustments regarding the delegation. As you may remember, this is a new requirement that began last year as a result of the prior legislative session, where all board members as well as school personnel are required to annually complete cybersecurity training. Then policy DCD local is a very minor semantic adjustment regarding the word appeal rather than request to be heard for an employee in the event of a dismissal. Then the next page incorporates policy FFAC, which at first glance looks like a lot of change, but in fact, we really are not adjusting anything from our actual practice in these changes. We are proposing, based on TASB's recommendation, the removal of some of the administrative details out of the policy regarding the medical treatment of our students and incorporating some requirements for non-prescription medication related to athletic programs and really just ensuring that we've got our language very clear in here about the administration of an EpiPen off campus, and that those individuals would all be trained and authorized to administer those medications. And last but not least, related to FFAC, on page 3 of 3, we do annually have our families complete and sign emergency information as part of the registration process. And so that, again, is not any change to practice so much as just adjustment of the policy language. Then the 4th and final local policy recommendation would be GKA local. And as you can see here, very, very minor adjustment to add the word calendar in between 90 and days to provide some clarification in the event that there was an ejection or removal of an individual from school facilities. That would be the timeline for filing of a complaint. With that, I would be happy to take any questions that you might have regarding Policy Update 116.
So I probably should have looked up the DGBA local because I'm sure that would answer my question. But on the DCD local, the change is it takes out the language. It says takes out to the board, right? But I'm sure DGBA is still, the board still hears that appeal, yes?
In the event that that appeal would escalate to level 3, yes, the board would hear that complaint. We have 3 local policies regarding filing complaints. One is for employees, one is for student/parents, and one is for community. And DGBA references any formal complaint that is by an employee.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I'll need to look over some of the details a little bit more, but I have just a process question in general. And when you say TASB recommends the changes, how does that actually happen? I mean, do they go through and review our actual material and line for line? And are they doing that to other districts? So kind of how is do they pick certain policies that they're targeting this month? You know, how do these policies get in front of us for changes?
Absolutely. As part of the policy consulting fee that we pay, we actually have a policy consultant assigned to us that works specifically on College Station ISD's policy. As you can imagine, they do have some template policies, but districts have a lot of variance in terms of some of the specifics around local policy. And so when they send out these packets, we like to make sure that you all have an opportunity to look and see what those proposals are, make sure that they're in alignment with our administrative regulations. In the event that we find that they are not, we typically will recommend adjustments prior to even bringing them to the board, or through this process right now, talk about any particular concerns or areas where we might need to go back to our policy consultant and gather more information in between. And so, again, these are specific to College Station ISD. While I'm sure there are a number of districts that have very similar local policies, we do want to make sure that they work within our administrative regulations and our practices.
So no action tonight. And if you have additional questions after you have time to kind of process, look at the wording, feel free to reach out to myself or Ms. Perry. We can provide you some feedback on those. So we'll bring these back around at the April meeting as well. And a vast majority of this is legal update, which we're required to update, obviously, because it's legal reflection of policy versus local. So those would be the ones. If you have additional questions, by all means, let us know.
All right. Thank you so much. All right, takes us to D2, consideration, discussion, possible action related to setting a date and time for management oversight workshop for human resources. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Nugent. We are, for our oversight management workshops, we're playing catch up. Human resources would actually last spring, I believe, probably April or May we were scheduled for, and then other things happened. So we're playing catch up on this particular one. We've shared several dates for you to consider through the course of the last few weeks in transmittal. Those dates I would ask you to look at, and let's see if we can't circle in on this. Remember, while we don't have to, our oversight workshops we typically handle around the lunch hour, 11 to 1, 12 to 2, somewhere along those lines. That's historically been our practice. Doesn't have to be, but we are looking at 3 different dates, March 29th, April 5th, or April the 8th. Now, let me mention this to you about the 29th. Well, and then the group can start conversation. In the next agenda item, we're going to give you an update as far as strategic design, strategic planning process, and we're looking at March the 23rd on that as a team of 8 meeting with the consultant from Engage to Learn and get feedback from phase 1 of that process. So know that we're going to be looking at March the 23rd here shortly on the next agenda item. With that being said, I just mentioned that to you because March 29th is the week after that. And of course, the 5th and 8th of April is 2 weeks after. So it'd be several meetings in a row, but again, it's up to the board. It's the board's discretion. So I have March 29th, April 5th, or April the 8th to consider. Does anyone prefer any of those or have a conflict of what will not work for you?
I'm good for all 3.
I'm good for all 3.
I like 29 and 8.
The 8th, I'm potentially in a trial. So, probably won't happen, but
So,
with all.
okay, well then, March the 29th it is. How's that work for everyone?
Works for me.
Works.
Excellent. March 29th 11 to 1. I'm trying to remember. I think it's what we typically do. Is that correct, Carrie? 11 to 1, and we have a break for lunch. So we'll go March the 29th, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. And we will post an agenda when we get closer to that date accordingly. We'll go a couple hours, human resources, so we'll hear from Dr. Dixon and Mrs. Hickman during that time. Good. March 29th, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. I believe that does it. Mr. Nugent?
All right, we're rolling through this until now. Let's see, D3. Consideration, discussion, and possible action related to the strategic design process and setting dates and times for special board workshops. Mr. Martindale.
Very good. I'm going to turn things over to Ms. Perry once again here briefly. As the board's aware, we began the process with our strategic design planning last week with 2 community summits. Last Tuesday, we had the in-person community summit at Consol, and then Thursday, we had a virtual community summit. Also last week, we had one focus group on Monday evening or later in the day, and then throughout the course of the day on Tuesday, we had focus groups. We have also opened our survey. We opened it last Monday, and that will remain open through this Friday, March the 12th. So with all that being said, I'm sorry, Ms. Perry, I'm taking your presentation from you. I'll turn things over to Ms. Perry to give us an update on our strategic planning process.
Thank you, Mr. Martindale. I feel certain that that is really just a very superintendent thing to do, so no worries. I'm accustomed.
This is what I get from whenever I had comments for Dr. Ely when he did this to me, so.
I believe that's correct.
Fair enough.
All right. So this evening, rather than provide a presentation, we really just wanted to highlight the website that Mr. Glenwinkle has created to ensure that we have lots of transparency around our strategic design process here in College Station ISD. We had originally planned to talk about this in detail at our February meeting, and with the cancellation of that date, of course, as Mr. Martindale mentioned, we are well into the process at this point. And so for anybody interested, you can find this website at csisd.org, and then under the board tab, we have a page dedicated to our strategic design process. On that page, you can see that we've got 4 phases in this process, and we are right in the middle of phase 1, engage. And so we, as Mr. Martindale mentioned, we had our summits and our focus groups last week. That survey, we would love to have even more engagement, but I think we're at about 1,200 responses as of this morning. And so far, very, very good response rate. We will talk momentarily about setting a date for a workshop to really come back together and look at what those findings were related to the engagement phase. They will pull together, they being Engaged to Learn, our consultant that we have been partnering with for this process, all of the information gathered through the various forms of feedback, and provide you all a comprehensive overview of not only that, but opportunities to really talk about how that interplays with our existing core beliefs and commitments, and how it might even influence some adjustments. So after that workshop, we will pretty quickly move into the design and then create phases. Those will be working with our strategic design team. You will have an opportunity at the regularly scheduled meeting to approve both the charter and the committee membership for that team of almost 40 members. And so while it's a much smaller group, they'll be relying heavily on that wide-ranging feedback that we are gathering right now. And then last but not least, in that lead phase, we'll really shift our focus over to community-based accountability, as well as the components of that plan that we'll really focus in on to begin with. We have a comprehensive calendar listed on the page as well, and you'll notice that obviously several of those dates have passed as we have moved well into this process, and we'll be looking at setting those dates here this evening. So with that, I would love to answer any questions that you might have about the process and where we are so far, or perhaps where we're going before we are able to shift our focus to scheduling those workshops.
Molly, after each phase, Cami, Engage to Learn, the consultant will provide the board an update as to work during that particular phase, correct?
Absolutely. Phase one will be a really comprehensive workshop that we anticipate would last about 2 hours. But after phase 2 and 3, it will be a more brief update at the regularly scheduled workshop meeting. And then after phase 4 is where we would be looking to perhaps schedule a special workshop that would be a 2-hour Team of 8 training on June 14th. So yes, there will be updates after each phase, with 1 and 4 being a lengthier, more comprehensive meeting.
Calendar time? Okay, we've been throwing these dates at you guys for a little while as well. March 23rd. Everyone clear for March 23rd? That is the Tuesday after we return from spring break. Molly, remind me, whether we attempt to go during the day or like a 5 o'clock time, we would have a different consultant, correct? We can do either. We can go midday, much like we do oversight. But I know, folks' work schedules and those types of things we have to be cognizant of. Or we can do like a 5 p.m., like a board workshop. So it's up to the board whether we try to handle it during the day or at 5 o'clock. This is phase 1. So they'll take the collective feedback they've received thus far through the various things, the survey, the focus groups, so on and so forth, deliver that to the board. And then we as a team of 8 will work through and review the core beliefs and commitments and those types of things and see if the board would like to make any adjustments to that reflective of the feedback we receive through that first process.
Later is going to be much better for me that day.
That's what I was going to say, too. On the 23rd, later is better for me.
I'm fine. How many hours did you say?
It'll be 2.
2 hours, yeah.
So we
Either's
can
fine.
go the 23rd, 5 o'clock, 5 to 7, work for everyone? Okay.
All right, thank y'all.
We're not letting you off that easily, Mr. Nugent.
On that day you are.
Right, you're good for that day, I'm sorry.
That's all I'm worried about.
And we want to ask you guys about June the 14th. That's a Monday. I realize it's the summer. We thought maybe the day before the regular June meeting, which everyone probably would have already had in their calendar, we thought could avoid vacations or any of those types of plans if we kept it close to that date. So is everyone available for June the 14th? This would be when we deliver the final product as far as the strategic plan to the board. We're looking at 2 hours again, and we can go 5 o'clock again or during the day, completely up to you guys.
I'm good right now. The only thing is, if our team qualifies for a really big out-of-state soccer game, that one's going to be a really hard decision for me, because we've never done that.
Will that affect afternoon or evening?
I don't know.
Probably not.
Probably
It
not.
just won't be.
I have no clue. But either one. I mean, I've already got it on my calendar.
I'm good.
Preferred time, 5 o'clock work better for everyone due to work commitment? You guys tell me, I'll be here already. So,
I'm good with any of it.
Either's fine with me.
man.
When we have a regular,
Then the next night we have a regular meeting, correct?
Let's do an afternoon then, if everyone's okay with that.
Y'all want to do 11 to 1 and we'll have lunch as well? Okay, all right. That's it. Okay, so review real quick. So we have Tuesday, March 23rd. That'll be 5 to 7 p.m. That'll be review feedback from phase 1, take a look at core beliefs and commitments. Then we have Monday, June 14th. And on that one, we're going to go 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. That's when the final plan will be delivered at the completion of phase 4 to the board.
And I will so we just came up with 3 dates, and I will send those to Ms. Green between meetings.
I'll capture these in transmittal as well as a reminder for everyone. We have worn the calendar out tonight. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you.
Lots going on.
Okay, and takes us to D4, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to 2021-2022 budget development process. Mr. Martindale.
Mr. Oz is going to kind of talk us through some preliminary conversations with budget development. The positive in this is she's not going to ask you for a commitment on a date for a workshop meeting.
I'm not.
So, all right, Amy?
And the good news is I'm also not going to give you a commitment on any numbers in here tonight. So it's hard to believe we're already talking about 21-22 budget. Time flies when we're having fun, right? So just to kind of brief you on where we're at. First of all, I always like to start off with our challenges. Each year they are a little bit different, but yet at the same time, they're the same. This is a legislative session year, I'll remind you. So it's not expected to be out until at least June 1st. That's the schedule. Unless they go into special session and extend it, which they have before. So there's many things that affect our budget that we will not know until June 1st. But please know we are tracking those bills and trying to see what it would mean for College Station ISD should any of them pass. We also are still under the unknown long-term effects of COVID-19. We don't know property value growth for this year and trying to estimate that. And now this winter storm we had kind of throws another kink in that for what damage it did to properties, permanent damage, or things that just really decreased the value because of that storm. And those are things that our appraisal district said they can't drive by and see. Because much of that damage is inside. So they're dealing with that. So property value growth is uncertain, more so than some other years. And the effect that COVID still has on our enrollment. We want to wait until August when we actually see the students that show back up. You know, our demographer is really feeling like we're going to have pretty substantial growth, almost 2 years worth. Because of those families that kept their children at home, particularly kinder and first grade. So we have that. Then you have the delay in estimating our property tax rate. Because with House Bill 3, it's based on current values, and then they compress that rate based on state average growth. And so we will not know that for sure until summer. So that's another unknown that came in with House Bill 3. I like to start every year's budget with what I call budget objectives and goals. So as a cabinet, we went over these, and some of our objectives are for next year is that we want to recruit and retain a high-quality workforce to support instruction. And that all affects budget as well. We want to support quality instruction in the way of staffing, supplies, equipment, and services. And we want to maintain a financially healthy fund balance. That doesn't mean we won't utilize some fund balance in the budget, but we want to be mindful of what is financially healthy for future years as we plan. So we want to keep that in mind. Kind of because it's a legislative year, we're kind of looking at it in 3 phases. We have been talking about budget 21-22 back since October. But officially right now we're in what we call phase 1, and we're reviewing our current year expenditures, projecting those out as a baseline, but we're also looking for possible reductions and savings. We have a committee that's gathered to update our staffing guidelines for all grade levels, aligning with best practices for instruction and budgetary purposes. We are, as a committee, we're looking at equitable staffing across the district based on enrollment and programs at the various campuses. We will utilize Cardonics that you also gracefully approved for us to purchase to help us in staffing and master schedule efficiencies, particularly at the secondary level. And we'll be reviewing and proposing a compensation plan that is competitive and supportive of those goals that we just went over. So that's everything we're kind of working toward in phase 1, which will go February through May, which is when legislative session ends. So June and July, hopefully we've got legislative session, their results, and how they affect College Station ISD. So we're in kind of a tight time span at that point. So in June and July, we'll be adjusting our revenue projections based on the results of the session. And we'll adjust proposed budget expenditures as much as we can at that point in time, because, it's not going to be long before school starts. And so to not impact that, there's only so much that we can do in that short period of time. So we will do what we can to adjust the budget accordingly to whatever those revenue projections are. But I like to say then phase 3 goes in beyond our budget adoption. So we may be working toward some expenditure things that how the legislature passed and how it affects the budget, because sometimes if we've got to make adjustments, it takes time. So we'll be doing that all through the next year. So that's what we call phase 3, and that's continuing to study the effects of House Bill 3, the requirements on us, and how we should be adjusting our budget accordingly. So that's what we'll be doing all of next year.
Amy, through I believe probably phase 2 is where we might place it. That's when you will begin getting preliminary property values May, June, and they'll continuously update those and go through the appeals process. And so we'll be looking at final projected property values the end of July.
End of July
correct?
is when we get certified values, yes, sir. And then August 5th is when the state has to finalize that compressed tax rate. So we're kind of pushing the limit at that point in time. Yeah. So looking at the budget assumptions that we're utilizing right now for 21-22, and these are ever changing as we progress throughout the year, we know better. But just as a reminder, for 2021, the current year that we are in, we budgeted for an enrollment of 14,183. The demographer had us at close to a 3% increase in enrollment, but due to COVID and what we didn't know, we dialed that back. We still budgeted for a growth, but more like 1.75%. Snapshot is what I like to compare it to, because that's what's in PEMS, and if you log on to EA's website, that's what you'll see. So our actual enrollment at Snapshot was 13,686. This is very close to, I think we've been communicating just with COVID, the decline in enrollment we had from 1920. So that's what that number compares to. The demographer is estimating a 3.9% increase in our enrollment, mainly at the elementary level, K and 1, and pre-K as well. So that's 14,220. Now remember, we get funded based on average daily attendance and weighted average daily attendance. So we budgeted 13,279. If I had to look today at what we actually have, because that's what we've got to project from, I think we're going to end up somewhere around 12,277 because we've got the rest of the year. But our whole harmless was 13,274. So we got that very close. That hold harmless looks at a 3-year period, and based on that growth, and they factored in some growth for us for 2021. So we did not miss budget to what TEA calculated hold harmless at much at all. So that's really good. And again, apply 3.9% for next year.
And so the snapshot enrollment, that's the end of October. Our enrollment today is 13,793, so right at 800. So it's went at 13,800. So it's went up through the course of the year. The hold harmless, Amy, you may kind of talk to them about when we say hold harmless, exactly what that is, how states utilizing a hold harmless to assist districts, because districts statewide have lost enrollment and attendance. So the calculation and I'm answering it as I'm asking you to share it.
That's okay. I can go into the mechanics of it.
Yeah.
So yes, TEA calculated a hold harmless enrollment that for the first semester, districts could use or not use depending on where they actually did. And I could probably place a safe bet that all districts are using it. First of all, they said the first 2 6-week period, then they added it to the third. And as mentioned before, that calculation is based on the prior 3 years. And they look at the growth trends each district had over those 3 years, and they actually applied some of that to this hold harmless. And so I think that's why we were so close in our estimates. Had the demographer been, correct in what really would have happened, we would have been a little bit better than that hold harmless. But with COVID, those students did not show up. They have now said that the hold harmless will carry over into the rest of the year, but there's some caveats to that. We've got to compare our last 6 weeks, our attendance with the virtual and a few other things with that. I feel confident that we will meet those requirements with the increased move of students from virtual to face-to-face, but we will have to make those calculations. We won't know again until school's out. But we are thankful that they gave us the hold harmless for the whole year. Does that answer your questions? Okay, property value growth, we budgeted 1.5%. Ended up at 1.91%. This is much of the reason later on when we see the final amended budget this year that we'll see recapture that we didn't plan on before. Lower enrollment and a higher property value. Those two combined will result in recapture. At this point, until we know more, we are not planning on any property value growth. This is due to the impact of COVID last year on businesses and potentially the storm this year. And historically, College Station ISD has used 99.5% as a collection rate. And we've met that in the past, so it's a good rate to use.
The weighted average attendance.
It is your average daily attendance for every student in the district. Some exceptions are pre-K. We only get a half an ADA for those particular students. Even though they go all day, we get a half. Then there's the special populations, such as your ESL, your special ed, and your career tech. So students in those categories, depending on the services and or the courses that they're taking, they're weighted heavier. So instead of just the 1 for an average daily attendance, it might be 1.1 is how they factor that average. Get a little extra weight because they understand that there's additional costs for those programs and to educate those students. So that's what the weighted average daily attendance is. You'll always see weighted ADA higher than ADA.
Can I follow up on that? Because I actually was unaware that the pre-K was funded at the half. What's the rationale behind that and how?
Originally, pre-K was required for a half day if you offered it. So you, of course, got a half ADA. You had usually students that came in the morning and students that came in the afternoon. With House Bill 3, they implemented what's called highly qualified pre-K, and they required all day. So how are they going to fund it, right? Because some districts did have all-day pre-K, and they funded it with Title I funds and or state comp the other half of the day for that teacher. So when they mandated all day and they had totally revamped the state funding system, they went in and said, we now have an early education allotment. And that was an allotment we didn't have before. And they said that would help fund your all-day pre-K.
The main purpose of that early ed allotment was to be able to apply to literacy in the primary grades. What happened to lots of school districts because of your pre-K going half to full and them not adjusting the ADA for pre-K is the early allotment was eaten up to pay for.
Make up that difference, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that has been pointed out to the commissioner on several occasions, but that's the reality. Correct, Amy? You would agree. Early, they would say, well, you have the early ed allotment now to account for that. Well, yes, we do, but it's utilized to adjust for that half ADA or that additional half day. So it's really not, you're not really able to use it to address literacy because you're covering another mandated or another initiative.
I'll have to take back some of my kudos that I actually gave to House Bill 3 and our legislators
No,
for
that's-
funding full-day pre-K.
Yeah, well, they
So
made it
I'm
very complicated.
Taking those back officially.
But bringing that up in the weighted ADA discussion, it brought back something. So the estimated 2021 hold harmless weighted average daily attendance, that only factors in the hold harmless through the first semester, because at the time, that's all I knew about when I prepared this, but also it's not quite a for sure thing. And so that we have hold harmless the entire year, that weighted ADA will come up a little bit.
When you run a state funding formulas, the big number is the WADA. If you hear WADA, that's the weighted ADA. Because the number of kids in those particular programs, as Amy just mentioned, carry an additional weight beyond the 1.0. So when you're running calculations, even through the course of the year, trying to project the funding you're going to settle up with the state, we get those reports every 6 weeks, every grading period, and that ADA within those weighted programs shift, and that's what kind of moves that funding throughout the course of the year. But WADA is the driver for projecting your state funding. And that's also, depending on your property value growth relative to WADA, is how you calculate your projections on recapture or not.
Okay, so I have some more questions about the pre-K.
Sure.
So prior to it full day being mandated, were you given 2 half-day attendance?
Well,
credit?
normally what you did was the pre-K students came in the morning and they left around noon. So those students, we fed them breakfast, we fed them lunch. Those students were bused home, and another set of students came in the afternoon, fed them lunch, and they were here. So that one teacher had 2 sets of students, and so
Right.
that's,
Yes,
it's each half.
double the
Half and
half.
half.
Right, so maybe that
Equal
one
one,
teacher
yes.
had, if you had a 20-to-1 ratio, that one teacher had 40 students that were calculated at a half ADA.
Okay.
So 20 ADA.
Okay.
Now we
So-
have that one teacher with 10
Right.
ADA.
And how many pre-K classes did we add?
Oh, goodness.
I don't have that
That was a
information.
lot. That's a lot. I'm
several.
learning something new, and so I'm just.
And don't give me, that's just
know, I
a
know,
mechanism, a
it's
catch of House Bill 3. Overall, House Bill 3 was very positive
Yes.
for school districts. So there are some unintended mechanisms in that I think will be cleaned up through the course of this legislative session. So it is still a positive.
Right,
We
right.
have full-day pre-K, and we've been able to manage that, but it does pull from other allotments that were included as a part of House Bill 3. That's way down in the thick of things, and I don't remember how many, yes, several, and some districts added even more than us. Yeah.
I'm just I'm trying to pay attention this year to the session. I mean, I listened to the appropriations the weeks ago, whenever that was. And I'm just trying to keep it all straight in my head. So,
Let me know if you do. Give me a call and you bring me up to speed as well.
okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I ask one more question on that? I know we have this extra time, I'm using some of it. That difference between enrollment and what we budget for ADA. So it's like, I'm assuming you budget some percentage?
Yes, well, we look at historically, but, so you look at what percentage. Now, it's only like about 94% there, and you would think our students come more than that. But that pre-K student is counted 1 for 1 in your enrollment, but only a half on your ADA. So those percentages, those classes really affect that attendance percentage. So yes, and we will track data, and College Station ISD has years of that to say, based on this enrollment, and we track it over a 6-week period, and where might we end up at the end of the year, and that's what we're using as those historical trends to determine
And then
enrollment to ADA.
Great. And then to follow up that, so when we were doing 2021, we did have some idea that COVID might affect enrollment. Is that our standard percentage from 2021?
No, actually,
Or
the
had we-
demographer, and Mr. Martindale, please correct me if I'm wrong, he budgeted at around, I think, 3.5%, and we dialed that back, having a feeling that COVID, we were not going to have the enrollment. And if we did, then attendance, we weren't sure. We figured attendance was going to be bad. So we dialed, when we were looking at average daily attendance, we dialed it back from like 3.5 to 1.75%. And then, of course, we ended up with an overall decline. So
And
we
it-
were looking at, are the students going to show up? And if they do, what is the attendance going to look like?
Right, so we did kind of dial that back a little bit.
Yes, we
That's what I
did
was
dial
saying.
it back.
We
And it-
did.
Yeah, and where it was right, obviously it was less than that.
For the hold harm, if you look at where the hold harmless is, so that's what TEA projected out, and what we actually budgeted off of, that's incredibly close, 5 students. And we look and talk about enrollment a whole lot, and that's how the demographer provides us this information. When you're running budgeting projections, we apply the growth year over year off the ADA. So when I would run those projections in 5 years, when I was CFO, the budgeting template, you use the ADA number. And so I'd apply the percentage growth off that. It's the same percentage you'd apply to your enrollment, but that accounts for the attendance piece. This is going to, we're in a legislative session. We're coming out of COVID. Here's the answer to the budget right now. It depends. And it's going to be that way for a little while. It's going to be tricky. I will tell you with the hold harmless, without it, it would have, obviously cost a significant amount of money. But we were in a place that I think we could at least cope and manage it. There are other school districts that if the second semester hold harmless would not been made available, would have been in dire straits. We have been very conservative with our budgeting over the years, and so we could have managed it. Now, they did apply the hold harmless, and it kind of put us back in the proverbial ball game as to our projections.
And so I will just finish with, I got it that this is very preliminary, but on your preliminary, it does look like you're using basically that same percentage from enrollment to actual what you expect to be attendance. So I was just wondering if if you think we're going to plan lower attendance than usual, or we don't know at this point.
Well, we don't know for next
Right.
year at all. We are going to be monitoring Kinder Roundup, pre-registrations throughout this spring and summer to try to get an idea of what that pre-K, kinder, and first grade enrollment may look like, and we will adjust accordingly as we get that information.
I would not anticipate us using 3.9 as the demographer projected.
Or the enrollment side. But then the other question, though, I'm saying is
Right,
do we
you-
expect of that enrollment, do we expect our historical amount of attendance, or do we expect, this year's amount of attendance, or somewhere in between? As
I would hope it's better than it is this year. We'll be in a much better place with COVID, with vaccines and that sort of thing. A lot more children came back. The attendance rate in person is better than it is virtual. So even now, as children come back, that attendance rate is improving to what we had in the fall. So I would expect the attendance rate to be better. I'm just guessing. Than what we have experienced this year. Hopefully come more in line with what we did for 1920 pre-COVID, of course, or even look back to the prior. Everything I'm looking at, I'm going all back even one more year, because last year when school stopped in March, when you look at financials and expenditures and attendance, it's skewed. So I'm going back 2 years.
No, I appreciate it. Again, it's just showing how many unknowns there are. And everything you listed in phase one basically was based off of enrollment numbers, right? And so
Right.
we'll do our best.
Okay. Give you an idea of timeline. This is just here for your information. We're at March 9th, so this is our first update for you. We've got some various dates in here for budget requests, personnel issues, but ultimately works down to that public hearing and budget and tax rate adoption, which is set for August 17th. It has to be done by the 31st, so that's a regularly scheduled board meeting. any more questions?
Can you go back to the very first slide? Maybe second. So, oh, yeah.
Challenges, that was the first slide. That one or the,
Is there one before that?
nope, that's it.
Okay. Okay, keep going. There we go.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, I don't know where it was,
Okay.
but there was a slide that dealt with looking at, reviewing current expenditures for possible reductions and so forth.
This one right
What, can you tell us kind of how that process works or how that's done?
Sure. Well, first of all, the biggest expense is staffing and benefits. And so we have put together a committee that's looking at the other bullets, and that's updating our staffing guidelines and actually monitoring it with everything that we have actual. That committee also looks at all resignations and determine when do we post to replace it, when do we not. So our biggest area, of course, is going to be in staffing and budgets. A lot of this part is a learning process for me because I haven't been here not even a year yet. So trying to get a good understanding of the expenditures that the general fund normally takes care of, and can we do things differently than we've done in the past. So it's just a process that we are going through and reviewing purchase orders as they come in, asking questions. When you think 85% of your budget is staffing and benefits, there's not a whole lot left on the 15%. And I will say, College Station ISD has really trimmed those expenditures. So I'm not having a whole lot of success in finding things outside of that area.
Thank you, Ms. Strauss.
Sure.
Yeah,
Honestly. Keep thinking I'm going to find something, and I'm not finding a lot.
it is, the staffing component, which is why you have to be very locked in to your enrollment projections and how things track over the course of the summer. Because if there are things occurring with enrollment that you have to address from a staffing standpoint, all those things, Josh, are tied together. The cardonics, and it will help us at the secondary level. It's just another tool to go through and make sure we're efficient in that. Because right now, and they do a wonderful job, our campus administration and counselors run those master schedules, but having a program to push that through to really run the staffing ratio for us might help us find some areas we can be more efficient in. I know that Stormy and Amy are meeting with elementary principals and looking grade level by grade level now in the allocated staffing, and if that we need to plan on adjustments going into next year. And they're having those conversations now because, for example, if currently there are 6 teachers in a particular grade level and our enrollment projections for the grade level coming up requires 5, how do we manage that through a reassignment, within the campus in another grade level, or through attrition with a resignation, those types of things. So all those things are occurring now. I think a real benefit with having Amy is it's a new set of eyes, so she can look at our day-to-day expenditures and stuff that we have bought over the course of the years and become accustomed to, and then she can ask the question, do we need this or can we do this a different way? So that's what's been refreshing to me, because something that maybe I became accustomed to seeing, is new to her. So that collective process.
Yeah, I will say, as updating the staffing guidelines, the second and third bullet is very beneficial, because we need to make decisions on this area that affects our budget to the magnitude that it does, we need to make good decisions. And, because once personnel are here, then we're committed. So we want to make good decisions on these areas. So that's why we're spending the amount of time we are on staffing guidelines and looking at the equity between the two, making sure we have those enrollment projections right, visiting with our principals. A lot of times they know their campuses a lot better than we do. What do they expect differently from what we may have proposed?
I'm going to ask, what do you interpret the word equitable? Because that's one that we talk about, that difference between that equal and equitable. What do y'all mean by
As
by
far
that?
as staffing, usually we look at, of course, then the guidelines 22-1 for elementary, that's what's required. We usually look at something a little less. I mentioned 20-1 for pre-K. So looking at that and assuring that, and not only there, but also in the secondary levels, that on a per student basis, that we're treating each of them similarly. Now, there are special programs and special populations that may affect that. So dual language is one of those that's not on every campus. And so maybe then there is a guideline for those campuses that have dual language. Maybe there is a campus that has a higher poverty rate, so a little bit different needs. So where you start, if everybody's the same, and then you start looking at those programs or differences between those campuses that might result in something a little bit different. But without those guidelines, whenever we get staffing requests, it's a matter of, oh, do we think they need it? Do we think they not? At least it gives us a baseline. And I call them guidelines, and they're not strict policy or anything, because things change. And there could be some extenuating circumstances that requires a slight adjustment for one year or another. COVID's a great example. Whenever we added positions, Mr. Martindale added these positions due to the circumstances, of course, they're going to fray from the guidelines that we have. That's why they're called guidelines. But it gives us a basis to make a decision.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I personally believe there is definitely a difference between just equal and then what really is needed and
Absolutely.
equitable.
So we have a baseline that's everything the same, and then we look at programs or special populations that campus may have. And even sometimes a larger campus, more students, sometimes the higher numbers create some efficiencies in some places. So we usually put some ranges for principals, assistant principals, those sorts of things.
Or at least have those
At what range.
discussions. Right. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Just one quick comment. Just the longer that I sit up here in one of these seats, the more I am amazed at how the target just keeps moving.
It does.
For someone in your position. And that's the other thing, that I'm having a really hard time wrapping my head around the comment that you said that you hadn't even been here a year.
No.
That just doesn't seem, and I know you did some stuff for us before, but wow,
No. Hasn't been a year.
it's nuts. All right, thank you so
A
much.
big learning curve. So just to get behind the data is a big learning curve.
We're glad you're here.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, takes us to D5, receive a report regarding supplemental and targeted academic intervention in response to the impact of COVID-19. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Nugent. Dr. Trammell and Ms. Parkerson are going to share some information with us relative to work at our elementary. Dr. Trammell is going to speak specifically to elementary, and Ms. Parkerson to the secondary schools, but work that's occurring on campus now as far as identifying, targeting students that are having particular struggles with their academics, but not only what's occurring now, but some conversation about plans for the summer as well. Our teachers and our principals are working very hard. These things are occurring. We want to just take a few minutes and shine a light on that effort that if we weren't sharing with you here, you might not hear about it otherwise. So, but we also wanted to speak to some things we're adding as far as the summer as well, knowing that we have some ground to make up from the last year and a half, so to speak. So, Dr. Trammell?
Okay. Good evening. We have been working with some of the elementary principals, and we've developed a three-prong plan for academic intervention at the elementary level. And the purpose of this plan is to close the gaps in academic progress caused by a disruption to the school learning environment, and just to provide additional learning opportunities for some of our students. When we think about a three-prong plan, what we are doing is a combination of tutoring. We're going to provide a summer school program, and then we're going to provide a Jumpstart Camp. When we look at what is different this year than what we have done in the past, we usually offer an ELL camp for rising kindergartners and first graders, and we offer an ESY camp, or what we call an extended school year camp, for our special services department kids. We do furnish breakfast and lunch and transportation for those summer school programs. We do offer also an enrichment and sports camp, and those two camps are camps of choice that parents pay for if they choose to send their children to them. This year, you'll notice in blue, we are offering a 4-week summer school program for identified students. We are also offering a 2-week Jumpstart Camp in August, and really it's the end of July, beginning of August. And then we have developed a centralized budget for tutoring. When we think about the tutoring, budget codes were shared with campuses on February the 4th. So as soon as we made our plan, Ms. Draws quickly formed a centralized budget for that and got that out to campuses so that campuses could have access to that to start work with our kids. Principals have secured tutors to work with our most at-risk kids, and tutoring and interventions have begun. As we plan for our summer school program, the locations are going to be Riverbend Elementary, College Hills Elementary, Southwood Valley Elementary, and South Knoll. Breakfast and lunch will be served to all the students attending summer school. The summer school will be Monday through Friday for 4 full weeks, so it's pretty intensive. The students will attend from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m., and we have developed the criteria for participation. In looking at the Jumpstart Camp, it will be for our most at-risk students. So we will look at the summer school data and the progress made by the students in summer school, and we will invite our most at-risk students back for a Jumpstart Camp. It will start 2 weeks before teachers come back, which is around July the 26th. It will be located at each student's home campus. So it is not going to be centralized at a few campuses. It will be at their home campus. The Jumpstart Camp is going to focus on foundational skills in reading and math. And then we won't have the opportunity to serve lunch and breakfast because our cafeteria staff is not on duty, but we will serve heavy snacks for the children. And then transportation is not going to be provided to this particular camp.
Penny, if you will, can you go to the previous slide real quick?
Sure. Let me go back. Sorry. Yep.
Okay. Summer school. So we're going to have it at 4 different locations, but it will have kiddos. Their eligibility will be for kiddos throughout the district, regardless of what elementary school they attend, correct?
Right. So
Okay.
we have developed the criteria for participation, and we are centralizing it to 4 locations so that our cafeteria staff can provide the free lunch and breakfast to all the
It helps
students.
us manage the child nutrition and the transportation component.
Correct, and
But
I've already-
it could have kids from any particular elementary school throughout the district.
Absolutely. And I've already had conversations with Hector on transportation, and we'll schedule a second meeting once we get all of our elementary students identified.
And then the Jumpstart, and I believe you said this, Jumpstart will be hosted at their home campus.
Correct.
Okay, and that just brings them back a couple of weeks or 2 weeks prior to the teachers starting, just to kind of get them back in the routine of school and getting going before school actually starts back.
Correct. And it will be just a focus on foundational skills and acclimation back into the school environment.
The summer school is new.
It
We have
is.
not done that. We've had it for enrichment and camps and those types of things, but not from an intervention standpoint. So that's a new component. Jumpstart, and I'm looking at Ms. Hester because, again, she's the keeper of historical knowledge. We had Jumpstart at one time many years ago, and at some point in time, it went away. So this concept we've had in the past many years ago, and something as Dr. Tremble visited with the elementary principals that came out was the desire for this and how they remember it benefiting kids. So it's not new, but we haven't had it in some time. So we're bringing that piece back as well.
I believe Ms. Cott had a folder that had 2014 on it or something, 20 something. It's been quite a while. Yeah, she dug it out. She has everything. So, yeah. So with that, that is our kind of our plan of attack for our most at-risk elementary students. And does anyone have any questions?
The tutoring that's occurring at the elementary level, that's during the course of the day, a pull-out program or some after school?
It can.
or
It
each
varies by
elementary-
campus.
Okay.
So Amy has established that centralized fund. So if campuses hired retired teachers or, highly qualified people that they want to come in and work with our kids, like for an additional guided reading group time or whatever, then they could do that. But some of it is also occurring after school. So it just varies.
Okay.
And the jump starts 8 to 12 as well? Time-wise?
The jump starts 8 to 12 as well.
Was the tutoring, were y'all able to get that going early enough to maybe see some effects of it on this round of MAP testing? by chance?
So, great question. Some of our campuses, especially the campuses that have federal funds, had already started tutoring. We feel confident that we are going to see gains at the elementary level. Developmentally, anyone who's taught the elementary grades will tell you that there is a growth spurt, so to speak, academically in the spring. And so we feel pretty comfortable that we're going to see good gains in this next round. We do know, though, that due to interruption in learning last spring and quarantines and various things this year, we have students who have gaps, and so we want to stick with our plan so that we can do everything we can to close the gaps.
Right. I'm excited about this.
Yeah.
About this approach. And can you share with us what some of the criteria is?
I sure can. So we looked at our MAP scores, and the students who are kind of in the red, really low, are students we are looking at. We are combining that with our response to intervention process at the campus level. And particularly, we're looking at Tier 3 students. So Tier 1 students are the ones that are in the classroom receiving good quality instruction. Tier 2 students are students that maybe just need a little extra attention, a little, reteach or explaining, a little just extra attention in their learning. Tier 3 students are students that we are highly concerned about that potentially could even be tested for some kind of special service, whether it's dyslexia or they could respond to additional time with an interventionist, extra reading group time, different strategies tried. We meet as a committee at the campus level and capitalize on the knowledge of everyone on that committee, and it is a diverse committee, and try different strategies and progress monitor students to see if we can find some strategies that work so that we can keep that student in the regular classroom 100% of the time and, keep them on par with the scope and sequence.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
I
Any other
really
questions?
like this.
Yeah, I do too. I was going to say, I think not only in dealing with the kids who've been affected by the interruption in learning, but even, when we look at our metrics, when we do that, I think this will hopefully have a very positive impact. How mandatory or highly suggested are the two programs?
Right. Strongly suggested. Obviously, you can't force someone, a family to let their child stay for tutoring after school or to attend a summer program or to attend a Jumpstart program. But certainly, our teachers are going to do everything they can to conference with parents and emphasize the importance of those things.
I would anticipate, Mr. Mann, that in some cases that as teachers and principals at the elementary level consider promotion for particular students to the next grade level, I suspect there'll be some of those conversations that the promotion to the next grade level would be dependent upon participation in the summer school. Not so much the Jumpstart program as opposed to the summer school program. So I could very much see that occurring, not in every case, but in cases where you're most concerned that movement to the next grade level is contingent upon you participating in this 4-week summer school program. And the commitment with the transportation and making sure and providing breakfast and lunch, we wanted to remove all the variables that might prevent them from coming. And so Penny and the principals that have made up this particular committee and framing this up have done a wonderful job. Actually, we just went to them and said, what do you need? And because I really kind of see our responsibility in central office is that, to do what we need or let the principal, we need these things. They know their kids, they know them best. And so we need to put mechanisms in place to help them make that happen.
Exactly. I wasn't going to say it that strongly, Mr. Martindale, but absolutely,
I'll
we
say
will
it nicer
strongly
next time.
encourage them. So, any
Ms.
other
Parkerson?
questions? All right.
Well, I just want to say also, I am very excited about it as well. I mean, for not only for the COVID catch-up, but I mean, I would argue also that even just looking at some of our metrics over the last few years, that, there's some catch-up that could be had. And I'm excited if we're able to use this to do that. And it does sound like we're putting things in place to, make it easy. Maybe the only one I could think of is an afternoon kind of, because it's a half day and that the child care issue. I don't know if that was something that's considered, or, I mean, I know, for instance, with pre-K previously, when it was a half-day program, some people didn't come because it just would, that half-day breakup was hard to manage. So hopefully we'll have the kids that need to come get there.
Absolutely.
Can you estimate, I mean, I know you don't know where that cutoff's going to be, but what kind of percentages of the elementary schools are we talking about? A 5, 10, 20% of kids that we may target?
We are actually working on that now. We have working lists. I have about half of the campuses so far who've put in their students because it's a combination, of course, of MAP. I know MAP, right? But it's that RTI Tier 3. So we, some schools have, 38 kids in reading and, 20 kids in math or, 40 kids and some of them have more. Some of our higher need campuses have more. But that is based on winter data and not this, kind of spring growth spurt. So we anticipate those numbers going down. So it's too early to tell yet, I guess, is the answer to your question, and especially with our young learners.
Yeah.
So.
And then the last thing is the funding. You mentioned a little bit. I mean, is some of this going to be like some of the COVID funding money? I mean, is that going to cover it completely, or is this something that we're going to have to stretch ourselves to make happen?
Sure. Well, we are working closely with Amy, and I know that there's a combination of funds we're looking at. So we're trying to scrape together funds from a variety of sources so that we can meet the needs of all our kids who need services. So.
There are some COVID relief funds that we were provided that would be eligible monies to consider here. There's several variables in identifying the kids that are eligible, and we have to match that with how much money we have and how many teachers we can afford. So there's several pieces working together. So, and it's early. We'll finalize that going into May. But I know that they've also been discussing the budgeting piece of it and trying to determine what we can afford. But we do have some COVID funds that we could utilize with this.
We have a combination, local, state comp ed, CARES.
I know DC is a long way away, but there's a lot of money that was just released there, and I would hope some of it would filter down to help get to these kids who had the learning gaps in our schools. So
Absolutely.
I hope the system works.
And while we're saying this is new now and COVID and so on and so forth, I would anticipate this becoming a part of what we do long term. So, all right. Ms. Parkerson?
Good evening. There we go. Okay. So I am excited to share with you the great work that is happening across our secondary campuses, starting with what is happening right now and really has been all year long to help serve our students who have some learning recovery needs related to previous gaps that were exacerbated by school closure. And at secondary, especially some of our students who were not actively participating in virtual learning in the fall, but are back on campus now, we're taking advantage of that to help get them back on track. So right now in our intermediate schools, they use their MAP assessment data and classroom performance to determine what students may need extra intervention and support. A lot of that support comes in their their day-to-day class activities, whether that be through small group instruction, differentiation, and in their instructional coaches coming in to provide some push-in support for the teachers in the classroom to help those identified students. They also do have some pull-out programs that are limited for some of the higher need students to work with those instructional coaches in small groups as well outside of the class. They have an advisory period that is used slightly differently across the 3 campuses, but every campus is using that time to provide additional interventions, whether it is students evaluating their own MAP test scores, setting their own individual goals, and working with their advisory teachers to track their own information and data. They also utilize some computer programs such as Edgenuity's MyPath to be able to look at students' MAP assessments and customize lessons to be able to provide that extra intervention and support at that level. So really in our intermediate schools, they are serving kids through their class times and their advisory periods right now, and didn't feel the need at this time to go ahead and add a before school or an after school component, that they're able to meet the needs within the times that they have allotted during the school day. At the middle school level, they have identified their students that have significant gaps, and a lot of our gaps really in middle school especially come from our students who we don't know what they've learned because they weren't really participating in the fall, but they're back on site. So they have used their MAP assessment data, their classroom performance data to select students, and then they're giving those students that have been identified a universal screener through our Edgenuity program. And students who are successful on that universal screener and are able to show that they have acquired the necessary knowledge and skills that they should have up until this point in the year are able to then continue with their regular learning in their classroom environments. Those students who need more intervention and support then work through their individual program that is customized in Edgenuity based on their pre-assessment. And they also have the support of teachers in an after-school program to work their way through that. So we just had our middle school principals meeting this afternoon and had an update. They are very pleased with the amount of participation that they are having. They're able to do this during their regularly scheduled after-school tutorial times. So the tutorial bus is available for these students. And so they're able to provide that transportation to them as well. And then they also are working on using advisory and before school for some of our students who may not be able to attend the after-school intervention times as well.
Tiffany, and it may vary a few minutes at each campus. Advisory, is that typically 20, 30 minutes?
I would meet you in the middle at 25 minutes on average. I think
Okay.
there are a couple that go a little bit longer and a few that are a little bit shorter than that. You know, it's
And advisory is good to use because the kids are there. So you're not wrestling with getting them early or if they need to stay after school, even with transportation. But it's time that is built in their schedule. So that's what makes it such a strong tool is because we have them in the building. Okay.
Yes, sir. And the instructional coaches at both the intermediate and middle school levels have been pivotal in this process in identifying the intervention tools that we have, creating the plans, really supporting our teachers in the work that they're doing daily in their classrooms as well. So just wanted to make sure to highlight their great work too. At the high school level, we not only have the need to provide learning recovery, but we get the added bonus of needing to consider credit recovery, making sure that they are progressing and accumulating the credits needed to graduate on time. So they have evaluated the student needs based on our fall 2020 academic performance, who is on track toward graduation, who has, earned their credits and so forth. They are implementing instructional supports in class. As a high school person myself, we're not the most naturally prone to small groupings and things like that, but we're seeing more and more of that happening in high school settings as well. But the biggest thing that is not necessarily new, but has been expanded at both of our comprehensive high schools is what I would describe as intermittent learning recovery programs. So we have credit recovery classes that are built into a student schedule. This is for someone who has a significant deficit. They're way behind their cohort. This intermittent learning recovery is really for those kids who are on the cusp. Maybe let's say the third 6 weeks, they are in that 65 to 70 range. They're almost there, but they need a little bit more time on that knowledge and skills to make sure that they can show mastery. And we don't want to continue on without them. We use that metaphor of, we don't want them to fall off the bus and us keep driving without them. And so those intermittent efforts are there to get them back on the bus before we keep moving on. And so we call it different names, but the idea is the same. And so that the Tiger Reset program at Consol at this point has identified over 140 students that they are working through, going content area by content area through the spring. They've already done some English recovery efforts similar to what I've described with middle school. Most of this is after school or through advisory, but they're able to use the tutorial buses and things to get the kids home afterward, and they've had great participation. At CSHS, the nomenclature is recovery of credit, or ROC, and they're doing those same things, subject area by subject area, identifying kids, keeping them for after school tutorials, sometimes extended late night sessions to fill the gap in knowledge before we send them forward through the next unit of learning. And so we've had great success with that as well. Okay. And then certainly we've continued our credit recovery classes in night school. I will say that at both comprehensive high schools, there has been a greater need to have students served through credit recovery and night school. Enrollment in all of those has increased as well.
So I have a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
So these programs that you just talked about, is this, and I was not following, I apologize for not following back then, but is this whenever College View was called Timber, is this what was going on at Timber years ago?
So some of it
recovery?
is what Timber Academy did. Timber provided an accelerated pathway toward graduation for students who, for a variety of reasons, needed a different path. And so that could be students who are in credit recovery classes who are behind in credits and needed to catch back up with their cohort. It also provided that opportunity for those who might need a more flexible schedule. Because they need to work for their families or different things.
But now they're at the high schools. They're at their zoned high school.
Yes, indeed.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
okay.
And so we're meeting a lot of those needs on our high school
Interesting you bring
campuses.
this up. I think this is something that over the course of the next several months that Ms. Parkerson and I and principals and some others are discussing. This may be something we explore further to, I don't want to say enhance this program, but if there's an opportunity to help kids grab some credits, or if they prefer to graduate early, or if they need some flexibility in their schedule, I think there's some conversation that we can have and some ideas around that I think would not take that much for us to incorporate and utilize as early as next year. But that's a conversation to come.
Okay. I was just trying to figure out history and understand it all.
Well, and I don't want to speak out of turn by any means, but Ms. Nolan as well. Ideally, on a high school campus, there would still need to be some kind of credit recovery program.
Okay.
But for that 0 to 3 credit deficiency, the kid who you probably could catch back up with one
Right.
period and leave them in their other classes and be able to get them back into that. And so certainly COVID has exacerbated the need for programs such as this.
Makes perfect sense.
All right, when we get to summer programs at the secondary level, we have some requirements that we have to follow with TA, and there are some changes to that. So as we transition into looking towards summer, I wanted to give you a little bit of background information about what our minimum requirements are and what we're planning to do above and beyond that. So in grades 5th and 8th, we have the Student Success Initiative, which tells us that a student can only advance to the 6th grade from 5th or the 9th grade from 8th upon passing their STAR test, or by unanimous decision of his or her grade placement committee that the student is likely to perform at grade level. And so they either show that readiness through that STAR performance, or our GPC meets and determines the plan for that student and moves them forward. So normally, there would be a retest given in June for grades 5 through 8, math and ELA. This summer, that requirement has been waived, but the accelerated instruction and SSI initiative has not been. Does that make sense? So we don't have to provide the retesting, but we do still need to provide accelerated instruction through SSI for those students. So what we are planning for this summer is expanding those SSI opportunities beyond 5th grade ELA and math to also include 6th grade. And we are looking at providing a 3-week summer program with targeted interventions in ELA and math, while also considering how we can integrate support for social studies and science into those programs to make sure that we are supporting all 4 core areas. So we are using our middle of the year to end of year map data as one of our sources of information to look at our students, our student groups. And then of course with 5th grade, we do have the added criteria of automatically including any student who does not pass their math or ELA STAR tests as well. So this is new but isn't new, right? So normally intermediate and middle summer SSI would be all one program together. So looking at adding in 6th grade, we're separating that into an intermediate program from the middle, and we'll have a different director for that program and so forth. Okay. At the middle school, we have a couple of different summer activities. In middle school, summer school is for advancement for students who are really looking primarily to open up a space in their schedules to make sure they can get to do all of the activities that they would like to do. So those are generally students who are taking our CTE courses, such as it used to be keyboarding, now it's touch systems, data. I always want to call it databases, it's not. But anyway, it has a fancy new name, those types of programs. And so that will continue, the separate summer school. We will continue our SSI that we provide for our 8th graders, but once again, expand it to include 7th graders who are identified through their MAP data and other classroom performance and so forth. This would also be a 3-week summer program. And at the middle school, we're considering how broad of a scope we can actually encompass. So when I described to you their spring program and their intervention, they're doing that at the middle schools right now for all 4 core areas. And it's working well. In summer, definitely we will provide that intervention for English language arts and math. We'll have to look at time, facility space, teachers, budget, all those things to see if we can broaden it to social studies and science, but that's certainly under consideration. High school gets a little bit of a different verbiage. It's not technically under the SSI umbrella, but we still need to provide accelerated instruction for those students who do not pass an end of course exam, one of our 5 end of course exams. The state has not waived the need to take a retest. And so high school loses the last week of June because that is our testing window. So we will continue our summer school program that is like middle school summer school, primarily for advancement with some credit recovery classes integrated into it. We, once again, have to consider at the high school level, not only learning recovery, but also credit recovery. And so as we are looking at our students who do not pass the EOC tests, we're also looking at how we can expand these opportunities with targeted interventions for core content areas with the additional carrots, if you will, of attaching credit recovery to participation in those programs. So let's say we have a student in Algebra 1 who did not pass their Algebra 1 EOC and did not pass for the school year, looking at incorporating in our planning a pathway for them to also recover their credit through participating in their SSI programming. So it would be for those 5 EOC courses, and we have a draft list based on fall data, but like I said before, both comprehensive high schools are making great efforts to catch those kids up, and so we'll reevaluate that as we get closer to the end of the school year to see what additional courses that we will move from the traditional summer school umbrella of credit recovery over into SSI for in-person live teaching, intervention and support through that program. And just as Dr. Trammell described, with our morning programs, we would provide breakfast and lunch. High school SSI is the only one that is generally offered in the afternoon, so those students would be able to get lunch and then come. There is also a high likelihood that we will have some of our high school students all day long in the regular summer school setting in the morning, and then coming to us for SSI as well. We'll provide transportation for our SSI programs, and each of these programs will be held at one location per level, and we're working on solidifying those locations at this time. All right. It's a lot.
Same thing, that very excited that it's happening now, and certainly for the summer programs, really beefing them up across all those grade levels. You mentioned like right now that, what was the instructional coaches doing some of the intermediate work, and how about at the high school level? Where are we getting the resources to do, all that extra time for with these kids?
So, everything is a team effort. And while we do not have identified instructional coaches at the high school level, we do have really strong department chairs and campus level leadership teams on each campus. And so really, they do a lot of the planning and collaboration and work in support of the teachers at the high school level.
So just, that's kind of what I figured, and it's just another example of where our teachers are really having to go above and beyond right now, for the kids and into the summer as well. So thanks to them.
Yes, ma'am. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the level leaders at the high school as well who support and collaborate with the department chairs. Okay.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Okay, thank y'all for the opportunity to highlight the great work that we're doing in our secondary schools and elementary.
Thank you so much. Okay, that brings us to the end of our workshop. We will be adjourned and be back here in about 30 minutes for our regular meeting. Thank you.